"What the heck is going on, Donna?" I demanded. Looking back, I realized there were weird little signs that had been popping up for weeks that I should have noticed. For the past 7 weeks, my wife Donnie, whom I called Donna, had been acting like she was suddenly super into me. She'd started making full-blown breakfasts with eggs, bacon, and pancakes instead of just toast and coffee. Every night, she'd whip up my favorite meals and pair it with a nice bottle of wine. After dinner, she'd slip into these super sexy pajamas and practically drag me to the bedroom. It was the same routine every night, full of passion and smooching. Did I ever question any of this sudden change in our 24-year marriage? Nope. I just went with the flow, thought this was our new normal, especially since our youngest son just went off to college, and we actually had some time to ourselves for the first time. I stepped up my game too. I started making it home by 5 p.m. every day. I took Donna out to fancy restaurants and even went to those small theater shows I never cared about before. We danced for the first time in years, and I was constantly showering her with flowers. Life without kids being constantly underfoot gave us more space to reconnect. My name's Thorne Winslow, but call me Thor. Donna and I had this marriage I thought was pretty much perfect for almost a quarter century. We had our ups and downs, sure, but I always believed we could weather any storm because of how much we loved each other. My career at a big publishing house was going pretty well too. After 20 years of busting my hump, I was a senior editor, overseeing everything from editing manuscripts to meeting with authors to developing movie rights. Donna was a legal assistant at a big law firm, managing a team and handling the daily workload of her subordinates. She was killing it too. But then, everything went sideways last Wednesday. Like usual, I came home around 5 p.m. Donna was in the kitchen cooking dinner. As I've been doing for the past couple of months, I walked up behind her and kissed her on the neck. But instead of turning around to meet my kiss like she always did, Donna just kept on cooking. Not appreciating my amazing kisses of the past 2 months, I asked, "What's going on?" "Nothing," she replied. "But I'm glad you're home, honey." She didn't take her eyes off the food. It was kind of a cold reply, like she didn't even want to face me for a couple of seconds to turn around and kiss me back. "What's the deal?" I asked. "You seem a little preoccupied." "No, nothing. It's nothing," she said. "Go change, and I'll pour you a glass of your favorite wine when you come down." Now, it seemed like she was trying to shoo me out of the kitchen instead of giving me a few moments of affection. I brushed off the feeling that something wasn't right and went upstairs to our bedroom. After hanging up my suit and tossing my shirt in the laundry hamper, I changed into my comfy Dockers and a polo shirt. Dinner was pretty basic, but Donna clearly put a lot of effort in making it special. She'd been doing that for months. It was a simple mixed greens and tomato salad, followed by a pan-seared pork tenderloin over mashed cauliflower. As we raised our glasses of wine, Donna said, "You know I love you, right?" It was different from my usual "I love you" followed by my obligatory "I love you too." After dinner, we cleared the table. Donna put away the leftovers, and my job was to wash the dishes and put them in the dishwasher. While I was doing that, Donna said she was going upstairs to change into something more comfortable. I was looking forward to seeing what that was. When I left the kitchen and went into the family room, the lights were dim, and Donna was sprawled out on the couch in a way that was kind of alluring. Her pajamas were barely covering anything, and the plunging neckline showed off her C-cup breasts. I didn't waste any time and got down on my knees to kiss her. It was an odd kiss, to say the least. From there, I kissed her bare shoulders and peeled away the remaining fabric from her breasts down to her waist. She has nice breasts. They're her best feature. "You love me, right, Thor? You'll always love me, right? No matter what?" "Of course I do," I said. I stood up and stripped down as quickly as I could and got back down on the couch with her. I wasn't going to waste any time carrying her upstairs. Foreplay was over. I was ready for some action, and she was ready for more. Half an hour later, we were cuddling on the couch. I remarked that she was extra hot tonight, and that her lovemaking had been amazing for weeks. "I'm glad we found some of that missing passion over the past few years," I said, kissing her neck and shoulders lightly. Our post-coital conversation went from her looking great despite nearing her 45th birthday to how her body looked toned for her age. "You could easily pass for 30 or 35, I said. Donna replied to my compliment by running her hand across my six-pack and said she was glad I kept my body in such good shape too. I was barely waking up when Donna said, "Honey, I need to tell you something." Anything, I replied groggily. First, she started, you know how much I love you, right? Yeah, and I love you just as much, I answered. I love. She said so softly that I almost didn't hear her. This Friday I arranged to spend the night with a man at your company. Her statement took a few seconds to register in my brain. When it did, I sat up and looked straight into her eyes and said, "What the heck are you talking about?" She tried to pull my head back to her chest where it was resting, but I stiffened up. "What did you do?" I repeated. "It doesn't change how we feel about each other. You'll still love me, and I'll still love you." "Are you kidding me? Are you pulling my leg?" I asked her. "No, Thor, this isn't a joke. This Saturday I have a date with a guy, a lawyer from my office. We're going out for dinner and dancing, then to his hotel room. I'll be staying with him overnight. I'll be home sometime late Sunday morning. So I get to be with some jerk all night Saturday and Sunday morning, right?" "Please don't use that language. It's so crude. He's a really nice guy. I really like him." By now, I was fully awake and alert to what was being said. I started getting dressed to show her that our alone time was over. Donna could see that I was not happy. "Please, Thor, don't be like this. You still only love me and I only love you. It's just this one time and then it's over. We'll be back to normal in a week and I'll forget all about it." "I don't think so, Donna," I snorted. "Who is this Prince Charming, Donna? Why now, when things are so good between us, would you want to completely ruin our marriage?" Donna, now wearing a satin robe, said, "I don't want to tell you his name because it doesn't matter to you, and I don't want you to try to get revenge on him. Plus, he's bigger than you and could seriously hurt you in a fight." "It's not because I'm angry, but because I've got a baseball bat in my hand," I shot back. And Donna continued, "It's just this one time because he's leaving on Sunday night to go back to his regular job in New York and won't be back. He better stay out of town," I said to her. "Otherwise, the next time he's in court, he'll be using crutches." Besides my initial reaction to Donna's announcement, which was anger, I started to feel a sense of loss. Donna and I had been together for over 20 years. She was the only woman I'd been with since we got married in our senior year of high school. I'd been tempted, but I'd never touched another woman in a sexual way. "So, how long has this been going on?" I asked. "It's not an affair, we barely touch." "Barely touches what?" I wanted to know. "Holding hands, hugging, kissing. Does that include fondling?" Donna didn't answer my question, leading me to believe she had reached the fondling stage. If not, she would have admitted to less physical affection. "He was brought in by a big law firm in New York to help us with a very complex tax case about 6 months ago," Donna began, her voice unnervingly calm. "The case was so complicated that I, along with a few other legal assistants, had to do most of his research. I worked very closely with him, from brainstorming flowcharts to designing the charts we'd use in court." She paused for a moment, then continued, "Over time, we got closer. About 2 months ago, he admitted that he had strong feelings for me, and that he wanted to spend a night together. You know, Thor, I wasn't about to sneak off to a motel with him or do something quick in the office. Our relationship wasn't that casual. We wanted a special night just for us." I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. "And what did you say?" "He asked if I could figure out a way we could spend a whole day or night together. I told him it would be hard to find a plausible way to do it without making you suspicious. Plus, I didn't really want to lie to you." Donna looked straight at me, her eyes trying to convince me that she was telling the truth. "He suggested that you try to convince me to allow us to have some time together, even if it was just one night or a weekend," she continued. "I told him I knew you loved me deeply, but I didn't know if you'd go for a divorce over a night like that. I figured you wouldn't, especially if you knew it was just a one-time thing, never to be repeated. But I was honestly not sure." I looked at Donna, trying to find a logical explanation. "Why, Donna? Why would you want to destroy everything? We have everything a couple could ever want: love, a great marriage, wonderful kids, financial security. We're healthy, and we're together. So why?" "He said I was missing something in my life," Donna replied, her voice unwavering. "You're the only man I've ever known. He made me realize I've never experienced love with anyone but you, and that this is something I need to be complete. He makes me feel like there's so much I haven't explored. And I really do have feelings for him. It's not just a fling, it's more meaningful." I sighed, feeling a mixture of pain and helplessness. "But Donna, we've had a great marriage. You're the only woman I've ever had, and vice versa, you're the only one I've ever known." You don't get it, Thor, she said, shaking her head. I need this. I want this. I want him. I snapped. How can you say you need this? He's a great man, Thor. He's handsome, younger than me, but he looks at me and sees me as irresistible. I find myself drawn to him like a moth to a flame. I can't stop thinking about him. Without him, I feel incomplete, and he feels the same way. Donna, you really want to throw away everything we have for one night with a stranger? My heart ached as I asked. Honey, please let me do this. I'll always be yours after. I'll do everything for you, cook, take care of the house, anything. I'll be the perfect wife you've always wanted. You can do anything you want to me whenever you want. I promise to be by your side for life, to be your lover, your partner, Donna almost pleaded. Except one thing, Donna, I said coldly. I'll have to live with the fact that my wife slept with another man and I'm a cuckold. For a man, that's the ultimate humiliation. You'll have to get over it, Thor. I have to do this. I need to experience this with my friend. It won't change my love for you, and I'll still love you. You'll have to understand. I looked at her, bitterness rising. So, all the affection, the tenderness you've shown me for the past 2 months was just to prep me for this night? You weren't doing it for me, you were just making it easier to get me to accept this date with this other guy. Yes, Thor. This is what I want, I'm going to do it, and I need you to accept it. Everything will be back to normal by Sunday. I just stood there, completely helpless. Donna had prepared every excuse to defend her decision, completely oblivious to my feelings. She had chosen her path, and I wouldn't beg. I turned and walked to the master bedroom, grabbed a couple of outfits and some toiletries for the next day. Then I made my way to the guest room, the one at the end of the long hallway in our sprawling house, with its own bathroom. Donna stood in my way as I was gathering my things. Don't do this, Thor. Nothing's going to change. I know you're angry, but it'll be fine on Sunday. We can go back to how things were. I looked at her, anger and pain bubbling over. It's not just a little angry, Donna. If you do this, we'll never be back to how things were. Without another word, I slammed the guest room door in her face, leaving her alone outside and me alone inside, with a churning mind and a broken heart. I'd considered every option, the logical and obvious ones: divorce, moving out, kicking Donna out, my personal favorite, convincing her to cancel the date, calling my family or even my kids. But divorce? That was never going to happen. As crazy as her actions were, I loved her deeply. I dismissed the other options. Leaving my own house? No way. Even if it all went to hell, I knew Donna would find a way to make amends, and she'd probably be the most attentive wife I'd ever imagined, even in the bedroom, which was probably unnecessary to mention. Calling my family? No, I wasn't going to air this out and make our marriage everyone else's business. If I involved my family, it would only force Donna to cancel the date out of external pressure, not her own sense of self-respect and love. If that date got canceled, I wanted it to be because of the value of our marriage, not the advice of my parents or anyone else. Thursday night, things were pretty clear. Donna waited until the last minute to announce the date, minimizing the time she'd have to face an angry husband and cutting down on the time I'd have to object. Less time meant easier execution of her plan without having to listen to my complaints. My thoughts kept swirling. I was terrified of losing her. She'd said she had feelings for this guy. To me, that felt like a signal that now that the kids were grown and out of the house, she was really considering leaving me for him. Just thinking about it made me ache to my core. Then I wondered, after getting intimate with him, would she still want to be with me like before? Maybe the newness of the relationship with this other guy would lead her to seek out different experiences, different men, and then she'd leave me for good. For the past 25 years, our married life had become a familiar rhythm. But to me, that intimacy was still precious, even comfortable and enjoyable. Even now, her body still excited me. Just thinking about her in a tight black dress or a bathrobe made me crave her. And deep down, I knew I always satisfied her. That was something I was always proud of. I loved the way her body tensed with each climax, and the way her eyes lit up with pleasure as her pleasure peaked. Then an idea sparked. Maybe I could throw a wrench into her plans. Maybe somehow I could make her date never happen. If this guy left town without a chance to see Donna again, I would have more time to talk to her seriously, to make her understand what she was risking. I wanted her to acknowledge the cost and maybe experience a little bit of the fallout, something small enough to make her never want to repeat it. Before falling asleep that night, a plan started to form. I realized I couldn't stop Donna from cheating with this guy directly, but maybe her boss could. I knew the law firm Vinnie, Brooke Harris, where Donna worked, had a strict policy against employee relationships. If a senior partner knew about this, there was a good chance they'd warn Donna about the impact on her job if she pursued this relationship with a colleague. The next morning I woke up early. Usually I would make Donna coffee, but not today. She said good morning, but I didn't bother to reply. "Don't do this," I said, then left the house without giving her my usual goodbye kiss. I knew she would notice the distinct chill in my demeanor. My plan, if you could even call it a plan, was to have a quick chat with Phoenix Vinny, the managing partner at Vinnie, Brooke Harris. Over the years, I'd met him a few times at company social events. Vinny was an easygoing, relaxed, and likable guy, the kind of leader everyone wants to have. Even though this was a personal matter, I wanted him to know what was going on between Donna and me, and about this mysterious New Yorker lawyer at his firm. Hopefully, Vinny could have a conversation with Donna about the potential repercussions of the date she had planned for the following night. Of course, I'm not a lawyer, but I assumed a firm like Vinny, Brooke Harris, wouldn't want to risk having my wife someday decide to sue them for harassment or anything similar. Mid-morning Friday, I drove downtown and walked into the Vinnie, Brooke Harris building. I took the elevator to the top floor, where the senior partners had their offices and a large conference room reserved for important clients. The outer area was a spacious open space, with a single reception desk at the center. To the left was a well-appointed waiting area with plush armchairs, a sofa, and a glass coffee table. To the right was a bar hidden behind a wall unit. Intricate, expensive modern art hung on the walls. I'd been here many times before for small company gatherings and social events. The gatekeeper of this office was Zoe Stratton, also known as the firm's lioness. I'd known Zoe from office parties and social events over the years. She was the most confident and likable woman I'd met at the firm. Zoe always had a bright smile, exuding an air of cheerfulness. At about 55, time seemed to only enhance her beauty. Zoe was about 5'4", with a body that was incredibly fit. She always wore professional suits, whether pants or ankle-length skirts, making it hard not to notice her toned legs and elegant style. Her blonde hair was often pulled back in a bun, and she wore glasses, a beauty of sophistication. As I stepped through the glass doors, Zoe recognized me immediately. She gave me a wide smile, approached me, and gave me a warm hug. Despite the anxiety swirling inside me, I returned her smile. "Thorne, good to see you. You drove all this way just to see me," she teased, not seeming to think I had business with the top brass. "Actually, I need to talk to Mr. Vinny briefly," I replied. "It's important, private." Zoe checked her schedule. "Mr. Vinny is in, but I don't see you on his calendar. He's super busy today with meetings and clients. Can I help with anything?" "Zoe, I really appreciate it. But I need to see Mr. Vinny in person. This is pretty important, and I just need a few minutes," I pleaded, making sure my face reflected the seriousness. She looked at me, seemingly understanding. "Does this have anything to do with your wife?" I really liked Zoe and didn't want to drag her into my marital mess. "It might," I said succinctly. Putting on her glasses, Zoe began checking Vinny's schedule again. "Mr. Vinny is finishing up a meeting. He has about 30 minutes before he has to meet a client for lunch. I'll try to get you a few minutes when he's back in the office." While I waited, I settled into the waiting area. Zoe came back with a cup of coffee, a mischievous smile on her face. I added a little Bailey's. "Sounds like you might need it." Just then, Zoe's comm device buzzed. "I'm back in the office," Zoe, Phoenix Vinny's voice echoed. "Anything for me?" Zoe seized the opportunity. "Mr. Vinny, Thorne Winslow is here. He's hoping to speak with you for a few minutes. He says it's very important." I heard Vinny ponder. "If she thinks it's important, Zoe, then let him in. I've got about 5 minutes before I have to go." Zoe guided me through another set of glass doors, down a short hallway to a large, ornately carved wooden door. The sign read, "Phoenix Vinny, Managing Partner." She opened the door, gestured for me to enter, and shut the door behind me. Suddenly, I found myself standing in the spacious, elegant office of the most powerful man at the firm. Vinny was standing behind a large desk placed in a corner of the office. A few chairs were arranged in front of the desk, and in the far corner was a seating area with armchairs, a sofa, and a sleek coffee table. His law degree was proudly displayed on the wall, a clear statement of the man's prestige. He walked around the desk to meet me, extending his hand in a friendly greeting. "Thor, good to see you. How are you doing? Still in the publishing business?" "I'm okay," I replied, trying to hide the anxious feeling simmering inside me. Vinny continued, his voice low and attentive. "Okay, Thor, Zoe says you wanted to see me about something important. If she thinks it's important, then I take it seriously. What's on your mind?" Suddenly I felt a little hesitant to tell this awkward story, but the words just spilled out. "Mr. Vinny, I really didn't want to bother you with this, and frankly, I'm a little embarrassed to have to ask," I said, trying to maintain my composure. Vinny looked at me, concern evident in his eyes. "What's up, Thor?" "The thing is, Mr. Vinny, my wife Donna told me she's planning on spending Saturday night with one of your associates. She's determined to sleep with him, and I can't stop her." Vinny seemed to understand immediately. "And you're hoping I can intervene, maybe talk to Donna or the associate, right?" To be honest, that was my initial goal when I came here, I confessed. But now I feel like this is between us, and I shouldn't drag anyone else into it. Vinny nodded thoughtfully and replied, "I'm sure you're aware of our firm's policy regarding the limitation of relationships between employees, particularly when there's a power dynamic involved. A relationship like this could cause significant legal repercussions if it went sour, and that's something we want to avoid." He continued, "Donna is a senior legal assistant here and has been for a long time. She's constantly exposed to assertive lawyers, and sometimes that can create a lot of pressure. In fact, I was once one of those assertive lawyers, and there were times when I wasn't always the best at respecting female colleagues. I know how challenging that environment can be for Donna, but I never expected someone could have such an impact on her." I just nodded. "Yes, sir." Vinny placed his hand on my shoulder, attempting to offer comfort. "Our current policy regarding fraternization might not be effective enough. I should have revised it to make it more binding, with clear consequences for violations, but it's too late before Saturday. A policy like that needs to be carefully reviewed and approved by the other lawyers." I stood up, preparing to leave. "Thank you for your time, Mr. Vinny. I'm truly sorry to have bothered you with my personal matters. I'll find another way to address it." Back in the reception area, I found Zoe waiting there. "How did it go?" she asked. "I think I shouldn't have brought this up to Mr. Vinny. I feel like a complete fool." Zoe nodded sympathetically, then gave a soft smile. "Do you want to hang out in the lounge for a bit?" I nodded. "Thank you, Zoe. I think I need to collect myself." "I'll make you a coffee or something stronger, if you prefer," she replied, smiling. I settled into a chair in the seating area, my mind racing, feeling like there were no viable options left to stop Donna from her upcoming date. Disappointed and helpless, I looked down, feeling sorry for myself. Just then, I heard Zoe's voice. "Drinking too early isn't a good idea. How about we go get lunch?" she suggested, her voice encouraging. The idea sounded appealing. "Sounds great," I agreed. Zoe buzzed her communicator to call in her replacement, then took my hand and led me to a restaurant she liked. We started with iced tea, but before we ordered, Zoe looked straight at me and said, "Tell me what's got you so down, Thor." I told her the whole story, every painful detail. I chose a Caesar salad while Zoe ordered soup and half a sandwich. We ate in silence, occasionally exchanging a few casual remarks. As the meal concluded, Zoe leaned back towards me. "You know, my late husband used to be a fighter pilot? I know you're a widow, but I didn't know your husband was a fighter pilot." He flew jets. We got married right after he graduated from the Air Force Academy. He flew in a 10 and was deployed to the Middle East twice. He even got a Silver Star, a Distinguished Flying Cross, and 2 Bronze Stars. Zoe's eyes welled up with tears as she reminisced about her husband, but then she looked into my eyes and said calmly, "Joe was my hero. He used to tell me about the dogfight training, especially one tactic called 1 against 2, where one enemy plane would try to attack their 2 A-10s from behind. In that case, Joe would immediately order his team to split, one flying low and the other flying high. The enemy would now have to choose. If he went after the low one, the high one would stay on his tail and shoot him down. If he went after the high one, the low one would turn around and take him out from behind." Her story was truly impressive, but I still didn't understand. "We're still talking about Donna, right?" Zoe smiled, her eyes sharp. Give her a choice. Thor. Let her choose, but make sure that, no matter which way she chooses, you're the one who wins. Just then, she gently placed her hand on mine, her gaze full of sympathy and glittering with understanding. Then, she smiled, a smile that seemed to invite me into a new plan full of hope. After lunch with Zoe, I returned to the office and plunged into my work, with no enthusiasm for the evening with Donna. I deliberately worked late, even stopping by my favorite bar, the Iris Club, for a few drinks with friends to escape the awkward situation at home. I got home around 10 p.m. Donna was waiting, but she didn't look happy. No phone call to let me know you were running late, Thor. I went to all the trouble of making a special dinner. It's sitting cold in the fridge now, but it's there if you want it. She paused, then continued, her voice lower and more intimate. I was hoping, maybe you'd come back to our bedroom tonight and make love to me. At that moment, she realized I had been drinking. Have you been drinking? I have, I replied, a slight smirk playing on my lips. I didn't want to face you tonight. I've been drinking to forget about the important thing you're going to do tomorrow night. I'm drunk now, and I'm going to sleep. Thor, please don't worry about tomorrow. It's just one night, and it'll be over before you even realize it. We'll be back to normal. I ignored her words and went straight to the living room, closed the door, changed into my pajamas, and collapsed onto the bed. The next morning, strangely, I woke up early. After a cup of coffee and a few slices of toast, I started my usual weekend chores, mowing the lawn, weeding. When I went back inside, I found Donna getting ready to go out. I'm off to the spa, getting my hair and nails done, she said nonchalantly. I'll be back in about 3 or 4 hours. I just replied with a silent nod and continued sipping my coffee. As she was heading out the door, I called after her, Donna, don't do this. It won't end well for you. I ignored her reply and continued with my chores around the house. By early afternoon, Donna returned, clearly prepped and ready for her evening out. Her hair was pulled back in a sleek updo, her nails and toes were painted a bright red. And me. I was also prepped and ready for tonight. She walked through the living room and family room, then stopped and exclaimed, Thor, why is the rug rolled up, and the coffee table is moved to the corner? I peeked out from the kitchen, nonchalantly replying, I've set up a dance floor. The big couch is also moved in front of the fireplace. Why did you do all this? She asked, her face a mixture of surprise and confusion. I did it for you, I replied. I'm going to convince you to stay home tonight, enjoy a romantic evening with me. Why don't you come into the kitchen and see what I've prepared? I invited her, a playful smile crossing my lips. Donna walked into the kitchen and was amazed by the dinner table, set like a fine dining restaurant, sterling silver cutlery, exquisite china, 2 candles, and a bouquet of scarlet roses in the center. It was all set for a candlelit dinner for 2. She sighed. Thor, I know what you're trying to do, but it won't work. I have plans. And you can always change your plans, I replied. Who are you more disappointed to let down, me or your date? Thor, please don't hurt yourself like this, she said, a hint of worry in her voice. I led Donna around the kitchen, showcasing each dish I'd prepared, a chilled green gazpacho soup with golden tomatoes, an iceberg lettuce salad with avocado and bacon, an appetizer of herbs stuffed pork chops with béarnaise sauce, served with potato au gratin, asparagus, and roasted cauliflower. Please, Thor, stop. This sounds amazing, but you can't stop me from going out tonight. I'll still try, I replied, firm in my resolve. I continued, after the dessert of vanilla ice cream and crème de menthe, we'll have coffee and your choice of after-dinner drink. The background music will be my favorite, One Stormy Night by the Misty Moods Orchestra, the perfect music for an intimate dance by the fireplace. Thor, I need to get ready. I bought a new dress for tonight and don't want to be late. Donna quickly headed upstairs. As I heard the shower running from the bathroom, I went upstairs to change into a black suit with a cotton shirt and dance shoes just formal enough for a romantic evening at home. About half an hour later, Donna came downstairs. She wore a classic black leb, the neckline low enough to reveal a hint of her ample bosom. The dress was short, above her knees, with a high slit to her hip, revealing the top of her thigh-high stockings as she walked, completed with seductive black heels. How do I look? She asked, her eyes sparkling. Despite my anger, I tried to maintain my composure, even appearing almost cheerful. You look amazing. Like you're about to get laid right now. But it would be even better if I knew you were dressed like this for me, not for him. It's a special occasion, Thor, and I wanted to look nice. I'll dress up for you another time. Music from George Michael's Careless Whisper played on the Sirius radio. I turned up the volume and looked at her. Can we dance one before you go? Donna hesitated briefly, then smiled. Of course. I stepped towards her and held her in my arms, cheek to cheek, as we always did. I could smell her favorite perfume. As the song came to an end, I gently kissed her cheek, small, tender kisses. She purred like a kitten. Maybe I can get her back, I thought to myself. I slid my right hand up her shoulder, gently tugged her dress strap, and placed a passionate kiss on her neck. She tensed. Thor, no, I have to go. We can do this another time. I tried one last time to convince her. It's not too late to change your mind. I'm not changing, Thor, she broke free from my hold. I'm going out on a date, and you can't stop me. I took a deep breath, staying calm. I understand. Your mind is made up, and this is the last time. But I said, before you walk out that door, there are 2 things I want you to do. She looked at me, a little dubious. First, look back at that dinner table with the candles lit, and the lights low. Remember what you're walking away from. I lit the candles and dimmed the lights. We can have dinner like this next week, Thor. I stepped forward, took her left hand, and slid the engagement and wedding rings off her finger. I don't want you wearing those around your Prince Charming. She blushed, flustered for a few seconds, but simply replied, okay. Just then the doorbell rang. I saw a silhouette through the glass. Who is that at this hour? Donna wondered, opening the door. Zoe, what are you doing here? Donna exclaimed, completely shocked as she looked at Zoe in a seductive red dress, off the shoulder, hugging her body, held together by only 2 thin ribbon ties at her shoulders. The dress was ankle length, but with a slit all the way up to the top of her red French stockings. Her hair was up in a bun, and a red bow tied in it. Thor invited me over when he was preparing dinner. He promised me a romantic evening and a night to remember. What girl could turn that down? Zoe replied, confidently. You look so different than when you're at work, Donna remarked. There are special occasions where I dress up, Zoe smiled. Donna stood in silence, and I looked into her eyes. Now you can go out with your prince, Donna. You had your chance to choose. Donna stood on the porch for a few minutes, hesitant, before finally turning and leaving, her silhouette dissolving into the quiet night. The sound of a car engine starting, and then she was gone. I was lost in thought, a quiet sadness and emptiness creeping in as I realized I couldn't convince Donna to abandon her fateful date. Things would never be the same. Zoe noticed the sadness in my sigh. She said gently, I can't imagine what you're feeling right now, Thor. But remember what I said, no matter what Donna chooses, you'll win. With that, she placed her hand on my chest, pulling my face toward hers. Her body pressed against mine, and she gave me a sweet, tender kiss. I responded, wrapping my arms around her waist, pulling her closer, and our kiss turned passionate and intense, our bodies melding together. When we finally broke apart, we were both breathless. Zoe smiled, saying softly, shall we eat? I replied, dinner isn't quite ready, but you can help if you want. She chuckled as I put an apron on her, tying the strings in the front, then gave her a quick kiss. I pointed out the 3 bottles of wine already opened: Chardonnay, Rose, and Cabernet, and Zoe chose the Chardonnay. I poured her a glass, and when she took a sip, her eyes lit up with pleasure. You can help me make the salad now, I said. I already roasted the bacon. You can chop it up and toss it with the chopped lettuce, then add the avocado. As Zoe busied herself with the task, sipping her wine, I watched her and felt a pang of anxiety. Here I was, with a beautiful, alluring woman. But I couldn't help but be a little apprehensive that my experience might not measure up to the men she'd known. Donna was the only woman I had ever been with in my life. I moved closer, placing my hand on Zoe's waist and whispering softly, I've never been intimate with any woman other than Donna. I can't help but be concerned that I might not measure up to the others you would have. Zoe turned, leaning into me and whispering, don't worry, Thor. Just do what you've always done with Donna, and we'll go from there. If I want anything different, I'll tell you, and vice versa. Whatever you want, I'll accommodate, anything. I love foreplay, I chuckled in response. Me too, she laughed softly, placing the salad bowl on the dining table. I pulled out a chair for Zoe to sit down, then sat across from her. Once we were both at the table, I poured more wine, and we raised our glasses in a toast. "To a memorable night together," she said, her smile warm. "I can't think of anything better," I replied. Dinner unfolded in a comfortable atmosphere, filled with laughter and Zoe's compliments on every dish. She declared it a 5-star meal, constantly expressing her admiration, putting my mind at ease. When we cleared the table, I told her to relax in the living room while I took care of the rest in the kitchen. Once the dining room was back in order, I joined her. Zoe was sitting in the living room, listening to the gradually building storm in the One Stormy Night track, swaying gently to the music. When she saw me, she stood up and glided into my arms. We danced, swaying to the soothing backdrop of the music. "Thor, I'm having a wonderfully romantic evening," she whispered, leaning against me. "So am I replied softly. "You should know that it's been a while since I've been with a man," she said, then looked deep into my eyes. "I've only had a few people who mattered to me, but I cherish them. And I cherish you, Thor." I nodded, feeling my heart calm. "I'm glad to hear that. Zoe, if I were to say I love you tonight, I hope you wouldn't be offended. I speak from my heart when we are together, and when tomorrow comes, I want us to remain good friends." As the music neared its end, we weren't really dancing anymore, just standing there, holding each other tight, feeling the rhythm of each other's breath. I moved my hand down to her waist, and she wrapped her arms around my neck, running her fingers through my hair at the back of my neck. Our bodies pressed closer, and I could feel her presence, her breasts, her thighs, her legs, everything seemed to meld together. I leaned down and placed a soft kiss on her neck and shoulder. Zoe tilted her head back, a small, emotional sigh escaping her lips. As I reached for her, pulling her closer, Zoe gently pulled back. "Give me a few minutes to change into something more comfortable, and you can do the same if you'd like." I nodded, quickly changing into black silk pajamas and a matching silk t-shirt. Pouring myself a cup of coffee, I added a splash of Bailey's Irish cream and settled onto the couch to wait. A few minutes later, I heard her approaching from behind. Before I could turn around, she placed her hand on my back and kissed my neck. When I turned, Zoe was standing there, wearing a black satin robe half open, revealing the nightgown beneath. Her hair was loose, her feet bare, creating a delicate yet seductive beauty. I took her hand, gently pulling her into my lap. We shared a tender kiss, starting softly, but quickly turning passionate. I whispered, "Zoe, you're the most beautiful woman I've ever known," and reached for her, gently unfastening the tie of her robe, letting the fabric slide down, revealing her alluring form. She smiled, her eyes sparkling. "Thor, I'm ready. Take me now." "I've always loved a good foreplay," I replied, and then gently kissed every part of her body, slowly, taking my time. I explored every inch of her skin, feeling the rhythm of her breath. Zoe shivered with pleasure, gasping and whispering, "I love you, Thor." "I love you too, Zoe," I replied, never stopping for a moment. Finally, after several minutes of intense lovemaking, she reached her peak, a soft moan echoing in the quiet night. But we didn't stop, and soon after, she was lost in pleasure again, waves of sensation washing over her. We sat on the couch, me pulling my pajamas back up, Zoe gently tying her robe. As the feeling of contentment washed over us, I asked, "Would you like another cup of Bailey's coffee?" She smiled and nodded. I went into the kitchen, brewed some hot coffee, and brought out 2 cups. We sat there, enjoying the warm drink, holding each other in the gentle heat of the fireplace, hand in hand, basking in the perfection of the night. "When you're ready, Thor, it's my turn to take care of you," Zoe whispered. Though we'd been passionate on the couch, we decided to spend the rest of the night in the bedroom. Still a little tired from our escapades in the living room, we cuddled under the blankets, whispering sweet nothings until we fell asleep. A few hours later, I awoke to the wonderful feeling of Zoe subtly caressing me. "I knew you wouldn't be able to resist me for long," she chuckled softly. She got me hard and strong, then climbed on top of me with confident charm. "Relax, Thor," she whispered. "Let me take care of everything." Looking up at her, I saw Zoe's beauty, her hair a tousled mess, her eyes dreamy, and her firm breasts moving with her every motion. She took control, making each moment an explosion of sensation. Her rhythm increased, and I was swept away, nearly reaching the edge. "Yes, yes, baby," Zoe moaned, "come with me." As she reached her climax, I couldn't hold back anymore. the feeling exploding within me. As she collapsed onto me, both of us gasping for breath, we were enveloped in a sense of fulfillment. The next morning, I woke up with my arm wrapped around Zoe's chest, my lips gently kissing her shoulder and neck. Zoe sighed softly, turning to meet me in a sweet kiss. We showered together, playfully squirting each other with soap, enjoying the final moments we had together. Our final lovemaking was slow and loving, a lingering farewell. As we reached the end, neither of us wanted to leave the other, and tears streamed down our faces. I held Zoe tight, kissing her forehead, her face, feeling her warmth, and finally we both sighed quietly, knowing this wonderful night was over. I left the bathroom first, preparing her towel, and when she emerged, we both got dressed in casual clothes for the morning. "Do you want to go to brunch on Sunday?" I asked. Zoe readily agreed, and we went to the Cheesecake Factory. It was only 10 a.m., and the restaurant was just opening. We sat next to each other, enjoying our brunch in the relaxed atmosphere, as if our time together was limitless. When I got home, I saw Dona's car in the garage. I came in through the side door, made a cup of coffee from the pot already brewing, and walked into the dining room. Dona was sitting there with a coffee cup in front of her, looking more serious than ever. In contrast, I couldn't hide the carefree, confident smile of a cat who just caught the canary. I went straight to the point. "How was your evening?" "Fine," she replied, her voice flat. "How was yours?" I decided to be honest. It was the most exciting, passionate, and lustful night I've ever had. Zoe was amazing, and we did everything to satisfy each other. I saw Dona lower her head, and a single tear rolled down her cheek. I had a horrible night. It was the biggest mistake of my life. "What happened?" I asked, trying to maintain my composure. "Wasn't Stanley the passionate lover you expected?" "It wasn't about Stanley," Dona snorted. "It was about me. I couldn't stop thinking about you and Zoe, about what you were doing with her. She's beautiful and alluring, and I know you had a much better night than I could have ever had with Stanley." She continued. "Stanley tried to make it romantic, but I kept thinking about you. Before we even sat down at the table, I was already drinking wine at the bar. The more I drank, the less I felt, but I kept going to drown out those thoughts. Stanley tried to stop me from drinking more, taking me to the dance floor, but by then I was too tired and unsteady. I was a terrible companion, and he started getting annoyed. When we went upstairs, Stanley tried to get intimate, but I had zero interest. I finally just let him do whatever he wanted to get him to stop trying." Dona paused, looking embarrassed. Stanley realized I wasn't into it at all, and when he finished, he said it was the worst he'd ever had. I fell asleep afterwards and woke up at home filled with regret. "Zoe and I had brunch after," I replied, "and honestly, I felt a little sorry for you that your evening was so bad, but not too much." Dona looked at me, her voice weak. "I'm so sorry, Thor, that I got involved with Stanley. I just realized now that he doesn't care about me like I thought he did. He just wanted to use me, while I was really looking for something meaningful." "Maybe you'll get lucky next time," I said sarcastically. "No, Thor, there won't be a next time. I want us to go back to the way we were, when we belonged only to each other. I was wrong, and I'm sorry. I promise to be the best wife I can be to make up for it." I paused, my voice hardening. "Don't rush it, Dona. You spent 6 months pursuing a relationship with Stanley, meticulously planning it all out. And now when things didn't go your way, you want to go back to how things were." I paused to make sure she understood what I was about to say. "For the next year, I'm going to give myself the right to date anyone I want, once a month. If the relationship goes further, so be it. At the end of the year, I'll reassess our marriage. If I feel good about it, I might consider being exclusive with you again. But if not, I'll get a divorce." Dona was silent for a few seconds, then nodded. "I accept your terms, Thor. And I'll keep my promise to be a good wife, to prove that I'm worth keeping." "All right then," I replied, taking a sip of my coffee while she sat quietly, understanding that things were irrevocably changed between us. "All right," I replied, although I wasn't entirely sure if I would actually date other women over the next year. But if the opportunity arose, I thought I would try it. "I'll be working outside today, and I have a few errands to run. If you don't mind cleaning up the dishes and tidying up the house, we can go to Tiggy Fridays tonight and share a rack of ribs." It was my attempt to get things back on track, to rebuild the harmony between us as this trial year began. And I was right. That night Dona was passionate with me again. The weeks went by, and things were going pretty well. Donna was genuinely attentive and seemed more sincere than before. The meals were more elaborate, especially dinner. She would usually set the table with a glass of wine, adding a small salad or soup for an appetizer, then a main course of grilled meat or fish, accompanied by potatoes and vegetables. There was even dessert. After dinner, Donna would wash the dishes and I would clean up the leftovers. The sex was better too, more frequent, and the passion was there. She seemed willing to do anything to keep me happy. One night, over dinner, Donna spoke softly. "I talked to Zoe today." I tried to keep my composure. "Oh, really?" "She invited me to lunch." "Weird, right?" Donna replied. "And then what?" I asked. After a glass of wine, I asked her point blank if she wanted me to give you up. "And what did she say?" I asked, unable to hide my curiosity. Zoe laughed and said, "No way. Thor and I were a one-night stand, and now we're good friends. We're never going any further. He loves you, Donna. Even though he was deeply hurt by what you did, he still does." Donna continued, "I told Zoe that I was ashamed of what I did to you in our marriage. I told her about my resolve to be a better wife to try to make amends, and hoped you would see my efforts." "Did you mention your agreement with me?" I asked. "Yes," she replied. "I told her about my intention to let you date others every month, and after a year we'll reevaluate the marriage. I confessed to Zoe that it was very difficult for me, that I would definitely cry a lot if I knew you were on a date." Donna chuckled softly, then said, "Zoe suggested that you should make being at home with me so appealing that you'd cancel your dates to spend those special evenings with me." I laughed and replied, "If that's your strategy, maybe I should pretend to have a date to see what you come up with." A few weeks later, I went to the Vinnie Brooke Harris offices. Zoe was still at the reception desk, and when she saw me, she ran towards me and gave me a tight hug. "Thor, it's so good to see you. Mr. Vinnie's waiting for you," she said, her arms still wrapped around me. She led me to Mr. Vinnie's office. When I walked in, he stood up and warmly invited me to sit. "Thor, I called you in for 2 reasons. First, I want you to know that we've rewritten our policy on employee relationships. The new policy includes clear and binding terms to prevent situations like the one you went through." I thanked him for his concern. Mr. Vinnie continued, "Secondly, I wanted you to know something else. I've written a separate letter to the firm of Hughes, Dewitt Lewis, where Stanley Wilbur works. While Stanley has been a great asset to us, I couldn't keep silent about his personal conduct with our staff." With that, he put on his glasses and began reading the letter. "Dear Steve, Stanley Wilbur has been a great asset to us on a complex tax case, and I appreciate that. However, this letter is to report on an unofficial aspect of his character. Stanley has engaged in a relationship with one of our married employees, which impacted her marriage, causing significant disruption and trouble. To me, this raises questions about his integrity. When all we have is the trust of our clients and colleagues, such disrespectful and unethical conduct makes me concerned about Stanley's potential to continue doing so in his work. For that reason, I wanted you to be aware of this situation and decide on an appropriate action. This letter might not fully reflect what he did to you and Donna, but I believe it will slow down Stanley's career trajectory," Mr. Vinnie explained, finishing the reading. I thanked Mr. Vinnie again. As I was leaving, I saw Zoe waiting. "How'd it go?" she asked, scrutinizing my expression. "Things are looking up, Zoe. I really appreciate you being there for me like a friend. Thank you." "I don't forget," she said, wrapping her arms around me, whispering, "I also gained a lot from this. I loved you when we were together." "I loved you too, Zoe," I replied, relieved to know that I had truly closed a chapter in my life.